This is the Charlottesville-Albemarle Bicycle and Pedestrian Count Training. We'll begin by giving a little background about the bicycle and pedestrian count, and then we'll give general count instructions, how to use the standard count sheet using an example intersection of Emmett and Ivy. As you may know, we are counting at 10 locations in Charlottesville and Albemarle. Those locations are listed here. All counts will be done on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday of the last 2 weeks of April. Each location will have one morning and one evening count. Morning counts will be done from 7 to 9 a.m. Evening counts will be done from 4 to 6 p.m. If we have enough volunteers, we'll also do one weekend morning count from 8 to 11 a.m. If you haven't signed up to count yet, but would like to volunteer, please email me at jballering@tjpdc.org to request a count location and a date and time. My email is on the TJPDC website just above the link to this video. This is our standard count sheet. You'll need to print one of these for each hour that you're counting. Try to get to your count location about 5 to 10 minutes early to find a spot to sit and count. You'll need to bring a count sheet for each hour that you're counting, a pen or pencil to write with, a lawn chair or something to sit on, a water bottle, and anything else you may need to stay comfortable while you're counting. The first thing you'll want to do on your count sheet is to write down the date that you're counting on this line and the location you're counting at on this line. So I've done my best to write those things here, assuming we're counting on the very first day at our example intersection of Emmett and Ivy. You'll also want to indicate whether you're counting on a weekday or a weekend by checking the appropriate box. So we are indicating that we are counting on a weekday. So the next thing to notice is that each count sheet is broken down into 15-minute increments. This is the first 15 minutes of the hour, the second 15 minutes of the hour, and so on. And you will need to, on each count sheet, fill in the hour that you're counting. So let's assume that we are at our Emmett and Ivy intersection on a Tuesday, and we are counting in the morning. So we're counting from 7 to 9 a.m. So our first count sheet, we're going to fill in this column with 7s for the 7 o'clock hour. So you can go ahead and fill those all in right away. The next thing you should notice, the next column says enters from, and this indicates the direction our bicyclists or pedestrians enter the intersection from. N stands for north, S for south, east, and west. Let's take a look at a map to see what that actually looks like. So here's an aerial view of our example intersection. This is Emmett Street. This is Ivy Road. If you keep heading up this way, this is north. If you keep heading up this way, you'll get to 29. This is south. If you keep heading this way, you'll get towards the main UVA campus. This way is west. Here's one of the parking garages. And this way is east, heading into Charlottesville. Okay, so here is our count intersection, and this pink X just indicates a good spot to sit and count. So our counter is going to be sitting here and paying attention to how people enter this intersection. So let's say they see a bicyclist or pedestrian traveling down Emmett Street. When they get to the intersection, that's when they're going to tally that individual on their count sheet. So what we're paying attention to is the direction they've entered the intersection. Once they enter the intersection, we don't really care where they're going next. So they could be going straight, they could be turning right, they could be turning left. None of that really matters. In every single case, we're just going to indicate that they entered the intersection from the north. So let's give an example and show what that would look like on the count sheet. So let's say we see a bicyclist coming down the bike lane on Emmett Street, and they enter the intersection here. Now we're back to our count sheet. Let's say that we saw that bicyclist heading down Emmett Street from the north at 7:05. So we're in this first 15-minute block. we saw them coming from the north. So we're going to use this row, and they were a bicyclist. So we're going to tally here. Let's do another example. All right, we're back to our map. Let's say that it's a little bit later. It's 7:25, and we see a pedestrian heading down Ivy Road this direction. So they're coming from the west, and they enter the intersection. Now it's time for us to mark it on the count sheet. So back to our count sheet. It's now 7:25, so we're in this 15-minute block. We saw that pedestrian coming from the west. They entered the intersection from the west. So we're going to use this row. They're not a bicyclist, they're a pedestrian. So we're going to tally in this box here. So again, we care about how people enter the intersection. What they do to leave the intersection doesn't get recorded. It's just how they enter it. The next thing to do is to give you some clear definitions for bicyclists and pedestrians. So for bicyclists, anyone on a bike, we are going to count as a bicyclist. One special note is that we are counting people, not bikes. So if you see two people riding a tandem bike, you are going to tally twice, one for each person, rather than tallying once just for the one bike. Similarly, if you see a parent and a child on a bike with the child either in a child seat or in a trailer, you're going to tally once for the parent and once for each child. Now, there are some things that look like bikes but are a little bit different, and we're going to go over a few pictures of those things to clarify when you should count them as bikes and when you should not count them. So this is a moped. It'll be motorized. It'll be used in the vehicle travel lane. And we do not count mopeds as bikes in this bike count. And this is an electric bike. So it looks a lot more like a bike. And really the only way you can tell that this is an electric bike is because of this battery pack at the back. We do count electric bikes like this as bikes for the bike count. This is an electric scooter. We have a lot of these around town. They may be the Veo Ride shared scooter system, or it could be a person's personal scooter. Yes, we count electric scooters as bikes for the purposes of this count. Now, for pedestrians, of course, we're going to count people on foot. We are also going to count people using wheelchairs, whether they are a manual wheelchair or an electric wheelchair that looks like this. Now we're back to our count sheet. Additionally, for pedestrians, we're going to count things on tiny wheels. So things like people on skateboards, people on rollerblades or roller skates. We would also count children in strollers or wagons. So as a quick recap, bikes are regular bikes, right? Whether they're riding in the bike lane, in the vehicle travel lane, or on the sidewalk. It includes electric bikes. It includes electric scooters. It does not include mopeds. Pedestrians counts people on foot, people in wheelchairs, whether motorized or not, people on tiny wheels like skateboards and rollerblades and roller skates, as well as children in strollers or wagons. So for every time you see a bicyclist or pedestrian, you are going to count them once in the appropriate row and column on this left side of the bold line. Every time you see a person, you count them one time on the left side of the bold line. On the right side, we are trying to gather some demographic information. So a quick caveat, there are asterisks next to most of these demographic pieces of information because we recognize that these are going to be based on the counter's best guess. So for all of these categories, we've been telling people that if you are more than 50% sure that the person meets the criteria for the category, go ahead and tally them. If you're less than 50% sure, just skip it or don't tally them. So let's go back to our example from the very beginning. Early on in our count, we saw a bicyclist coming from the north on Emmett Street, and we tallied them here when they entered the intersection. Now we're going to think about that person again, and we're going to tally their demographic information. Let's talk about each of these categories in a little more detail. The first category, we want to acknowledge whether the bicyclist or pedestrian was either female or male. So if they appear to be female, we're going to tally here. Let's say that that bicyclist we saw was appeared to be female. This category is to identify whether or not the bicyclist or pedestrian appeared to be a child. So we have this 16 years of age because you can kind of get a sense of whether or not that person looks old enough to drive. We're going to say that the person who was biking by looked like a woman and also looked like perhaps a college student, someone old enough to drive, someone definitely above 16 years old. So we're not going to tally here. We'd also like to get race information. So if a person appears to be non-white and you are more than 50% sure that that person appears to be non-white, go ahead and tally here. We're going to assume that that was the case in our example. So we're going to tally here. Next, we'd like to indicate if someone has a physical limitation. So again, this is subjective. So if someone is using a device to assist them, we're going to go ahead and assume that that indicates a physical limitation. So something like a cane because of poor eyesight or a wheelchair, you would go ahead and tally here. We've also been encouraging people if it just appears that the person is having difficulty physically navigating the space, go ahead and tally there as well. We're going to assume that our bicyclist did not use any tools or have any difficulty navigating the space. So we're going to not tally there. These two categories only apply to bicyclists. The rest of them apply to both bicyclists and pedestrians. So if our bicyclist is wearing a helmet, which we're going to assume she was, we're going to put a tally there. And then we want to indicate if this person is wrong way riding. So the way we want people to be riding their bikes is in the same direction as traffic. So if a person is riding opposing traffic, we're going to tally here that they were wrong way riding. We're going to assume that our example person she was riding in the same direction as traffic. She was not wrong way riding, so we will not tally here. We're going to do the same thing for the pedestrian that we counted later. We are going to say that that pedestrian was appeared to be male, so we will not tally here. It also appeared to be a college student, so not a child, so we will not tally here. That person appeared to be white, so we will not tally here. They were using a wheelchair, so we will tally here. And then because it was just a pedestrian, we do not need to indicate that whether or not they were wearing a helmet or wrongly riding. Now there's just a few more pieces of information on this count sheet. At the very bottom, we have a section for notes. We want you to use that notes section to indicate anything that might have impacted the number of people biking or walking through the intersection. So things like construction, any crashes that happened while you were there or shortly before you got there, any inclement weather, things like rain or fog, anything else that you can think of that would impact those numbers. Lastly, we want to get a count of motorized scooters and bikes. So let's say that we had later on, just before the end of the hour, we saw a person on a bike coming from the east. They're riding along in the bike lane, coming from the east. We are going to tally them here. Then we are going to do our demographic information. That person was, let's say, a female, and they were wearing a helmet, and they were not wrong way riding. But because that bicyclist coming from the east near the end of the hour was riding what was clearly an electric bike, we are also going to tally here. So for every electric bike or electric scooter, we're going to tally once in the bike column in the appropriate row, and we're going to tally again in this corner over here. All right, so I've moved back over to our blank standard count sheet just so I can scroll down and show you that there is a second page. You do not need to print this second page to take with you when you count, but it does have some useful information that you might find helpful. So down here, these are our more traditional intersections. There's not really any special cases. And what we've done is give you a cheat sheet that describes what it looks like when someone is entering from the north, entering from the south, entering the intersection from the east, or entering the intersection from the west. So these are some descriptions of what it looks like in each of those cases so you can better orient yourself when you go out to count. The very bottom of that sheet just includes a lot of reminders about things that I've talked about in this video. So what time the morning, afternoon, and weekend counts are done, what you should remember to bring, a reminder to arrive 10 minutes early so you are ready to get started right on time. And then these two bullets cover a little bit more about how you are supposed to count people, not bikes, and gives clear definitions that we talked about for what is a bicyclist and what is a pedestrian. A little disclaimer about the demographic information just being our counter's best guess. And then lastly, what do you do when you are done with the count? When you are all done counting, as soon as possible, but definitely not longer than a week after you're done counting, take a picture or scan your count sheets, just the top ones, and email those to me. I will let you know that I've received them and that they're clear enough for me to read, and then you can go ahead and dispose of them. So that really concludes our basic training. If you have any questions, you should feel free to email me at jballering@tjpdc.org. There are some special cases in our 10 locations, and I'm going to have separate videos for each of those special locations that'll give a little bit more clear advice for how to count at intersections that might not be, that don't use the standard count sheet. Thanks for counting.